I had just finished all my classes for medical school, getting into medical school. I had some free time, free credits, and Krishna Bhamani had started taking a class on Bhagavad Gita with Rupanuga, who was teaching at the university. So she came back one night and said she couldn't understand a lot, and would I take the class with her and help her understand what they were talking about. So I said, okay. So I went. Narottam was there. She went. So I met Rupanuga. It was a friendly occasion. And then he said, as a matter of fact, Prabhupada is coming to speak at the university and not too long. So would you come? I said, sure. We had just got finished hearing Richard Alpert, Ram Dass, and Timothy Leary. So we were moving in that direction. And so Prabhupada came. Rupanuga asked me to, if I wanted to come to the airport and be part of the tiny crew that greeted him. So we went to the airport. Next thing I knew, Prabhupada was right behind me, driving in the car behind me. We drove to Rupanuga's house, and that's when we met. You could see Prabhupada's goodness, first of all, as a person, and the world needed more of that. It was searching for that in the 60s to get away from the manipulative, materialistic, ladder climbing type of definition of success. So then he spoke at the university, and he had just come to America, so his English was still pretty heavy laden with Indian pronunciations. So pretty much we didn't really understand anything. We just said, okay, we'll just listen to the sound. So that was good. And then we followed Prabhupada to, he was speaking with Allen Ginsberg at Ohio State, which is where Krishna Bhamani attended school, so we went there. And then after that, Rupanuga said, well, why don't you come to New Vrindavan? Prabhupada's going to be there. You can get initiated and married at the same time. So we drove to New Vrindavan. I told Prabhupada I had just been accepted at Wayne State Medical School in Detroit. I asked him, what do you think I should do? He said, go, be a doctor. And then, so after seeing Prabhupada, we got initiated. We got a place in Detroit near the medical school. And so I would go to medical school, and then we would go out at Wayne State campus and chant, play guitar, and all of a sudden people started coming. And it became so much that one day in medical school, they gave us our cadaver to dissect, and I said, I can't talk to this guy. So maybe I'll leave this and I'll just focus on starting the temple. But that was, 15 years in preparation to renounce that. When I was 8 years old, I was going to the Rosh Hashanah service with my father back in Buffalo. And I remember walking with him and wondering, does God ever have, like, you know, a female connection? And, you know, like, I didn't know the word at 8 years old, but like a conjugal, it was going through my mind. I always remember it. So when he presented the philosophy, I said, oh, okay, here it is. After 20 years, you know, here's where I must have gotten it. So the whole idea of the reincarnation, the permanence of the soul, that connected me pretty quickly. Well, at that time he had already established getting up in the morning, doing artik, having class, having evening class, going out on Sankirtan, distributing back to Godhead. That was the simple program. And we had, through the preaching program, gone up to Ann Arbor. There was a whole group of LSD hippies up there that had a house. We went there, and we turned most of them into devotees. They're still there. And they all came down. So everything started really progressing from that point to the point where it got big enough that Prabhupada wanted to come. We were at the airport to greet him, and there was hundreds of devotees that came. And we had set up a seat for him. And when he entered, everyone was just so intense. I think that's the first time I ever cried. And it was a universal feeling there. And he was extremely happy with the reception. But then when we got down to get him picked up outside, we had gotten a car to come, and it was late. And Prabhupada waited a few minutes, and then he didn't like that. He didn't like being late. He didn't like waiting for things like that. So he said, I'll just take a taxi. And then right at the last minute, the car came. But it taught a lesson that he valued time. And later, as he would speak, he impressed that his time was limited here. And he didn't like waste of material, and he didn't like waste of time. And I think he stressed that with most of us, that not to waste facility, not to waste funds, not to waste food, not to waste time, not to, you know, to have a quick learning curve on things. Otherwise, he would be there at some point in the learning curve to make sure that it didn't peak. It kind of flattened out, and you learn the lessons as quickly as possible. So he stayed at the house of an Indian member. One of the Indian community gave us a set of Bhagavatams in Bengali that I gave to Prabhupada, and that's the ones that he used. So somehow or other, I was an instrument in getting him those books that he used to translate Bhagavatam. I never realized that that's what I would be doing later, or what the involvement with books was, because we didn't really have that many books at the time. But he stayed for a day or so, and then I think he went on to New Vrindavan or Chicago, I can't remember. We had Jagannath deities that Narayana and I, we went, Prabhupada would always teach Krishnas everywhere. So we ended up going to a junkyard, and we found 3 railroad ties in the junkyard. We carried those railroad ties back, and then he carved the Jagannath deities out of that. So it's like Krishna coming out of the column. But he loved the deities. Prabhupada explained with the deities that Krishna is already within every molecule and every atom as the super soul. So consciousness is within everything, and it becomes a manifestation of Krishna when the spiritual master calls for that consciousness to come through those elements to be able to receive communication and give communication. So he used that example of the authorized mailbox. You know, you can't just put your letter in any box. And he would explain the Goswamis' relationship with their deities and how the deity would speak with them, how the deity would move, how the deity would walk with them. So based on his explanations and stories, you know, I mean, we could with our Western mind think this a little too far out, you know. 4-armed divinities, that's a little too far out. But when he said it, backed with Vedic knowledge and ancient histories, you know, it was not that difficult for everyone to accept it. And he was feeling the movement starting to expand, and that was one of his great pleasures. Seeing the movement expand, seeing books come out, seeing devotees able to work together, which was pretty unique because in the temple, you're living with people who you would never think you could be close to before. But because Prabhupada instilled a high level of nonpartisanship, where, you know, you don't define yourself by divisions, you define yourself by some common understanding. So that was a very valuable gift that, you know, not that everyone has to be homogeneous. You had your individual personalities, obviously, but he brought a unification that was important at that time. So that was one of his important gifts. Especially today, you can see the whole world is divided into 2 parts, and you know, everything from the haves and the have-nots to, you know, Republicans and Democrats to, you know, men versus women to, you know, it's a very divided thing. So it was a very unique experience for all of us to be with him those 11 years and feel the unity of all countries. That was Bhaktivinoda Thakur's vision, that all countries would be united under one banner. So that was, he made that happen, and that was all colors, all races, all nationalities, everything was focused on making the world a better place through Krishna consciousness. The next time I was with Prabhupada was, we had come back from Sankirtan, and it was hot Detroit. We were all sweaty and beat. So I was upstairs taking a shower, and the devotee knocked on the door and said, "Srila Prabhupada's on the phone." And I thought I didn't hear him right. You know, I said, what do you mean?" He said, "No, you need to come." So wrapped a gumsha around me and went downstairs, and I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Prabhupada's on the phone." So I picked up the phone, and he said, "Bhagavan Das?" I said, "Yes, Prabhupada. What can I do? How am I supposed to serve you? What do you?" I was shocked, really, you know. He says, "Well, there's many things that you'll do, but right now you're supposed to come here. I'm trying to form an reorganization of society, and you need to be here." So I said, "Okay, I'll come as soon as I can." And so then I called Rupanuga. I said, "I just got a call from Prabhupada." He said, "Me too." I said, "What's this about?" And he said, "I don't know." So we met him in San Francisco, actually, to the Rath Yatra. I got sick the day of Rath Yatra, so I didn't go. But then afterwards we met, and he said, "You know, come to LA. We have to talk about things." So he said, "I'm wanting to make a governing body commission like my Guru Maharaj, and, you know, want you to participate in that." So Karandar, who was a extremely intelligent person, he was another one who impressed me, that, you know, how intelligent all these people were. You know, they weren't just looking to get out of work. They were smart people. So we met. Prabhupada gave the idea of a governing body commission, and but at the same time there was a parallel experience going on, and that taught us the lesson about detail. What had happened was a series of events were taking place where more and more Prabhupada was feeling that he was minimized. So he was going to his quarters, and one girl cleaning his quarters had turned his picture upside down, and he walked in and was shocked. And we're kind of witnessing all these things, like we weren't that detail oriented at the time. Then he went down to the temple room, and someone had put salt in the Charanamrita, and so that was one thing. Then we went back to his room, and a devotee had asked him how come he had never responded to his letter. And then he called in Gargamuni and the other temple leaders and said, why haven't I received this letter? Then he found out that the temple authorities were going through his mail and selecting things that he thought he should see. So when Prabhupada started putting all these things together, actually it originally started, he had sent Achyutananda to India, and he had written back to some godbrothers that in India they didn't like Prabhupada being called Prabhupada. They thought that was, you know the story, it was reserved for Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So then Prabhupada said, this is why I wanted you separate from them, because there's a lot of envy. Well, we weren't used to the word envy, really. And so this is like, who are these guys in India? And what does this have to do with us? You know, but Prabhupada thought that through the letter, the poison had entered, and it seeped through to other people that were in management at the time to diminish his stature. Then they printed a book in New York, and they didn't put his title right. They put Bhaktivedanta Swami instead of, or they put Swami Bhaktivedanta, they got it wrong. And that disturbed him. So there was a bunch of events, and he stopped his translation because he felt that the movement at this stage had received a coronavirus to the heart. So he was just beside himself, figuring out what to do. And then he decided that he had to get away. So he called us in that you're the GBC, you manage. And then he was getting ready to fill out the immigration form. And his secretary at the time, I don't always mention names, but was reading kind of mechanically the immigration form. And I was sitting there, and he asked Prabhupada, have you ever done any criminal activity? And Prabhupada looked at me, and he said, what did he just ask me? And I was like, I couldn't repeat it. And he looked at me and said, see, the poison is everywhere, everywhere. I said, I have to leave right away. So, you know, when Krishna does one thing, many things are done at the same time. You can't always see all the layers. But he had always been thinking about going back to India and getting, you know, Indian trained people to come back and Americans to go to India. So he used this as a reason to start the whole India yatra. Prabhupada had talked about having an ISKCON newspaper. He wanted a daily newspaper. So I thought, that's interesting. So we went out and bought a printing press, and we started putting things together in the basement of the Detroit Temple. And so I told Prabhupada this, we're trying to do a newspaper like you said, and he said, oh, I see you like printing. He said, we're having some difficulty in France with the books and between the devotees, so it's time for you to change location. So you go over and be the GBC in Europe now. So right at that time, right when I was leaving with Indraduna at the time, that's when Ambarish came, right when I was leaving. So from there, Prabhupada picked up Ambarish, and good things happened after that. And so I went to Europe, and it was unusual. I mean, I had taken some French in school, but the way the devotees were relating with each other, there was a lot of conflict. And so I got there, it was a little temple. We had no place to sleep, so I slept on a table top. And I knew Prabhupada was coming in Paris, and that was the next time that I saw him. It was in Paris. He put on a big initiation in these famous gardens in Paris. There was 1,000 people there. And then we went to the Salle Pleyel, and all the devotees from Europe had come. It was a big event. A lot of communists there. And we had put this big Vyasasana up. And after that, he said, maybe in these big meetings, I just sit on a mat because they can't understand all this. That's the time when he said to somebody, they were all rebellious communists at the time, and they were, why are you sitting on the throne? Why are they bowing at you? And so then he said, well, when you know the science of God as well as I do, then you can sit up here and they can bow to you. And then they quieted down. But that's when he said, maybe we go a little easy on the big chairs up there. But it was interesting to watch him remain undisturbed. As, you know, he said that a Vaishnava is like the ocean. It may get ruffled on the top layer with big waves, but underneath stays calm. So he was teaching us not to get, he knew Westerners are easily agitated, you know, and ready for the fight, you know. So he taught us that lesson. I had sent Narottamananda to India. He was my friend from college, and he sent the deities, beautiful deities, and Prabhupada came back and installed them, and we gave him the Bhagavad Gita at that time, the French Bhagavad Gita. There's a little bit in between that, but Pradyumna had made all the bathing things. So it got back to that issue of Prabhupada was very efficient, and he didn't like waste. So he saw these giant bowls of things to bathe the deities, and he said from the Vyasa-san, why did you make such a giant amount? That's unnecessary. Just make little. What are we going to do with all of this? You know. So everything was a lesson, you know. But one part of the lecture was cute. He said, "We're calling the deities Radha Parasishwara." He said the Parisian French girls are the most beautiful in the world, so Krishna has come to get some French girls. Good sense of humor. So there was morning walks. We went to the forest there. There was a nice park, but we lived also in an area where there was the upper end prostitutes, the best of that lot. So whenever we'd go on the morning walk, they would also be around. But, you know, Prabhupada just went through there, you know. We'd always tell the story of Haridas Thakur, the prostitute showing herself and him chanting, "I'll be with you as soon as I finish my round." So we would go through there, morning walks every morning. He liked it a lot. Yes, we did morning walks every day. The first time I remember being chastised by Prabhupada was when I walked into his room in Bombay to ask for a loan to buy New Mayapur, and he asked me why I didn't know that the building materials were being eaten by termites. And it wasn't casual, it was very serious. Like, you came all this way and you didn't notice that the contractor is giving us bad lumber. It was a chastisement. And the lesson was that if you work for Prabhupada, you're supposed to be a detailed person. And at one point he said, the best student is the one who doesn't need to ask a question, but just knows what to do. And the next best is he asks a question, so he knows what to do. And in last place is the person who thinks he knows what to do, but doesn't really know what to do, and makes a mess of everything. So he was concerned that everybody should be as concerned as he was about everything. Prabhupada, of course, saw everything as Krishna's energy, so nothing should be wasted or misused. So when he went into the bathrooms in Mayapur and he saw they were being misused and unclean, he would get upset. He wanted perfection in the sense that he wanted everybody to pay attention. He didn't want sleepers. The point being that he was involved in that temple and Vrindavan and Mayapur, unlike in America, where he let us get rented buildings. These were his personal properties. And he taught everybody how to be detailed, down to the paisa, which is what, a fraction of a cent, right? So the morning walks were not like the fun morning walks that you'd go through, where everybody would compete to be up front. Everybody on those morning walks was competing to go to the back. So Prabhupada would look over all the books and then he'd find discrepancies of dollars. Sometimes it was discrepancies of paisa. And he would call the bookkeeper up front, he'd call the GBC up front, he'd call everybody and say, why don't the books balance? It was to that degree that he cared for everything, because he knew how hard the devotees in America were working to get that, and he felt that he had to protect their service and not let anything get wasted. So he never let us take taxis. We always had to take the bus or the train. We couldn't, even when somebody got a donation from their parents, he wouldn't let them spend it on taxis or flying too many places. We had to take the trains. So he taught the principle that caring means frugality. Actually, he said at that time, detail is the sign that you care. Attention to detail is a sign that you care. And if you're not attentive to detail, it doesn't mean anything to you. Well, for Krishna, everything has meaning. There's nothing that happens that's not supposed to happen or without meaning. So in doing these bookkeeping and buying raw materials and accounting for everything, he was teaching us that everything has a purpose, and Krishna sees everything, and so does he. But what did impress me about that I learned is that whatever you focus on, that ends up manifesting. So whenever Prabhupada needed something and he focused on it, we would find that it happened. And that was particularly true when it came to personnel. Like I saw Prabhupada got the land and he wanted these magnificent buildings, and then all of a sudden Sarabi Maharaj appeared, like out of the blue. So Sarabi Maharaj, who we were very good friends, he was really a brilliant architect that I think he was just starting to get into it, and Prabhupada pushed him to design Bombay and design Vrindavan, and it was like, for me to watch him was like, when you watch one of your godbrothers or godsisters, do pretty amazing work, it was like watching Krishna or like watching Prabhupada. It was everything that made your faith in the process more solid. Like there's a controller behind everything, and that controller is moving souls from the point of the time of death to the point of during life to whatever, to be at the right place at the right time. And that was always pretty amazing to see how these devotees would appear in Prabhupada's life to execute his vision. Prabhupada wanted friendship amongst the devotees. He stressed many times that in Krishna consciousness, unlike material life, you don't get ahead by putting someone else down. You don't think you're more by making someone less. So he liked the idea of cooperation and friendship. And one time he saw Narayana Prabhu and myself hugging, and he said, that's the way it should be. Embracing, not fighting. But, of course, that's the ideal. Prabhupada went to Switzerland, and he must have had a foresight what was going on. Shyama Sundar said, why don't you go to Switzerland for vacation? It's beautiful there. And Prabhupada got there, it was just freezing mountain weather. And first of all, he flew over, thought it was very dangerous. And then he got there and it was blasting cold. Then he went up to his room and it was cold there. Then he complained he was like a prisoner. And then they couldn't find anything for him to eat. So he was cold and he was hungry. And then he said, well, Bhagavan must be in France, so have him come. So there's two parts to the story. One, he hadn't eaten, so I had the devotees prepare this huge feast we carried on the airplane. And I got there at night, and he got up out of bed, happy to see us. I said, Prabhupada, we brought you some prasad. He got up and just ate like he hadn't eaten in a week. But then there was the other part of this story, that the 2GBC had gotten money from the book fund or the temple fund to purchase properties. And they decided that they were going to invest it in the gold market. So they took all these tens of thousands of dollars, went to the Swiss bank, and put all of it into gold. Well, when Prabhupada found out about this, he was like upset that, how do you know it's going to go up? What if it goes down? Like, this is gambling. You're not supposed to use, oh, Prabhupada, this is for sure. Gold is going up and this and that, So it was like I was there to enforce the fact that you need to go back to the bank and sell it and get your money back with no loss and use it for the purpose that you're supposed to use it for. Well, Prabhupada had to always rein everybody in, because he thought Westerners were pretty independent-minded. And the Indians would always do it subtle, like manipulation with the money. But America's just outright Wild West. We're going to do this, and But then he got out of there and flew back to America, went to New York. So he got to eat, and he got to get his money back. When Prabhupada told Kishori about the teachers being abusive to the children, and he was upset with that, obviously, and he told her, as part of that, that the parents are the best to raise the children. So there was the theory of sending a child to Gurukul to learn to love Krishna, And that was the potential that he saw, that the teachers could represent the parents. That was the ideal. And Prabhupada was looking at the ideal, but then there's the real. And the real was that we had teachers who were not even really trained to be devotees yet, and not necessarily trained to be teachers. So that's when he said, parents are the best to keep the children. But what was happening is that there were so many kids coming in, and the parents, there was no facility to teach them, and they were reluctant to send them to a public school. But, our schools were not ready, really, at the time. So that was a learning experience, which unfortunately caused a lot of pain to a lot of people that are still recovering from it. And the lesson there is when you assign someone something, you have to see where they are right in the moment and see what their potential could be, but not mistake their potential for where they are right now. And children are not something that should be experimented with. That, parents or teachers, if they don't know what to do, they go to the grandparents, or they go to, educational school, or they learn what to do. But in ISKCON, everything was coming so fast and furious that, build a temple, print books, teach children, meet politicians, it's just a lot all at once. And Prabhupada knew that his time was limited. He always knew that. And he was here 11 years. That's not a long time to try to do what he did. In his mind, he had all the vision right away. He knew exactly what he wanted to get done. And so whoever came his way, he would try to put them in a position. He didn't wait for everybody to be perfect. He just, if you can take the responsibility, take it and run with it. And that was how he had to deal with his movement. Prabhupada made me and Rupanuga and Karandar like original BBT trustees. And he instilled that he didn't want changes, and changes had to go through him. In an unusual move, he let me design the European books the way I wanted, different than how he did. And he just gave me that facility. But in speaking of changing and editing, of course, historically, these are the things which, even to the present moment, are causing the most unnecessary division within the society. There was editing, the position of gurus, and the role of women in Krishna consciousness. All these things have been partially resolved. Regarding the editing, I was an editor for parts of Krishna book, and so I can speak from experience that he liked my editing, and he just wanted it so that when you read the English, that it didn't sound like Indian English. That was the point. He wanted the English to flow. He didn't want it changed. He just wanted the sentence structure to be proper. It wasn't a major thing. People misheard things on the tapes. They typed things wrong, so it was like he didn't want English mistakes in his books. He didn't want editing beyond proper English, except when it was like Planet of the Trees instead of Planet of the Forefathers, obvious things. But it was difficult to do that even when Prabhupada was present. Especially after Prabhupada's not present, to make changes is every devotee is on the lookout for that. So that is a part that still needs to be dealt with, that is the editing just to make the English better, or are you presenting your idea in a sentence that wasn't even there in the original? So that was the editing part. So being a BBT trustee, we were very aware of that. I was very, Hansaduda and I, we were allowed to kind of come up with the presentation of his books for the European class, and Prabhupada trusted us to do that. And they were very nice, and he loved them. And so we got a good score on that one. But editing is an issue, and it still is. And all I can say is that there's a difference between correcting the English in a sentence and putting your own thoughts in. He didn't want that. He didn't want everything redone. If something wasn't heard right on a Sanskrit word and it needed a different tense to it, or it was minor things. Otherwise, he said, when the Goswamis wrote a book, even if there was some minor, you just left it and you had to figure it out. In translating the foreign languages, there was always, and a lot of foreign languages like Canadian French and French French, South American Spanish and Spanish in Spain. So, Prabhupada would give leeway like that, you really have to understand what's the intent being said here, and then do your best to get that in place. So even within the French or the Spanish, sometimes people who came from Spain would say, this Spanish isn't, the spot on. They'd say the same thing with Canadian French and French French. So Prabhupada trusted that, you have to do your best, but it depended, that's why it was so important that the English translation and editing be faithful to his original intent, because everything else comes from that. So it's a very sensitive issue not to over-edit, or he didn't want us to under-edit. Like he didn't want something to sound incorrect to a scholar's reading of it. That's what he was most concerned about. He didn't need us to get into his thought process and add to it or subtract to it. He just wanted it simple English. It's like Prabhupada said, Krishna consciousness is simple for the simple and complicated for the crooked. And it's better to err on the part of being simple and not think that we have such a big brain that we need to dig deeper and go beyond what's right in front of us there. So it was pretty simple to me after I'd been a devotee for less than a year, and I was running Detroit Temple and editing the books. Like, how to edit? It's pretty simple. It's not like a complicated thing. He didn't want bad English. Very simple. Just correct the English. Don't put in your own thoughts. That's what he was most worried about. It's like Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, man's glory is in common sense. So common sense was a good aspect of Krishna consciousness, you know. Prabhupada saw Mayapur as a chance for all the international devotees to come together and appreciate that they are born out of a dream of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. That was his vision, that you are the dream of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that people of all nationalities and races would come together in one spot. That's why I built my place here, so that my family, generation after generation, would have a place to come and understand each other. And he got to see that fulfilled during the festivals. That gave him immense satisfaction that you're born out of a dream, just like Vishnu sits on the ocean and dreams the creation, and from that comes things. So the dream of a powerful person is the subtle form of its manifestation. So Mayapur manifested, and the temple manifested, and devotees from all over the world manifested. And it was a way that Prabhupada wanted to keep things from breaking down into partisanship. My temple, your temple. He wanted Mayapur and Vrindavan to be everyone's temple, so that everybody would participate financially and intellectually and with devotees to have a common core in Mayapur. Because he understood that people are different and they're going to stand on their differences and think that one difference is better than another. So Mayapur was a way that the differences would be flattened and everybody would realize their commonality. So that's what the world is lacking right now. Communism, democracy just lacks what do we have in common? And any attempts other than Prabhupada saw this as the failure of religion, that they couldn't nail down really what we have in common, whether it's the Hindus or the Christians or the Muslims or whoever. They just saw the differences between the religion. Prabhupada used to say, you can call the sun whatever name you want, it's still the sun. You'd use that example. So today, everybody is looking at the differences, and it's getting ugly because religion has failed. Science basically has become, for the most part, atheistic, although some scientists, like he wanted the Bhaktivedanta Institute to show, that behind everything is a superior intelligence. Sariputta from the Bhaktivedanta Institute, he created that beautiful theory that you can't get more by starting with less, that you have to have more knowledge, or the field of knowledge has to be complete, and from that comes everything else. So mathematically he was showing that greatness has to pre-exist for everything else to happen. The full information has to exist so that it comes down in different forms of information. So now the whole world has nothing to unite about. ISKCON can fall into that same trap, because after Prabhupada's disappearance, you had a fracture between the Ritvik people and ISKCON or the Prabhupada people, everybody thinking that they're Prabhupada people, and there was a fracture, that no, one is better than the other, one is truer than the other, and they can't still resolve it, even though both sides have very intelligent people. When the heart gets hurt, it can't think philosophically so much, or they use philosophy to protect the heart. So after Prabhupada left, many hearts got hurt. And to resolve that, they would pick and choose parts of the philosophy that would substantiate their going in a particular direction, rather than people saying, how do we do better? How do we stop and do better? Prabhupada said, if you see you're going in the wrong direction, you have to stop and turn around and go in the right direction. You don't just keep going out of your ego in the wrong direction. You take the first exit and you turn around and you make the right turn. So the resolve of all these differences is the proof that you have a guru, because the guru, Prabhupada said, is a living truth, like Krishna is a living truth. And so the access to information is what Bhakti Yoga meditation is about, that you have the information from the source, but it's how clear you are to receive that information. The fact today that devotees are still fighting in court, today in India, between Ritviks and non-Ritviks, to the tune of multi-million dollars, because someone thinks, well, I have this facility to make money here, so I'm going to use it in this court case to fight this devotee because I'm right and that devotee is wrong, is a proof that you don't know what you're doing, no matter how intelligent you think you are. Because in Prabhupada's mind, it's not your money to spend, it's his money. It's not your money, it's his money. That's if you want to work within ISKCON. But don't say that you're working within ISKCON, taking the father's money, like Prabhupada told the story of the son that put on a big birthday party for the father, and it was all elaborate, and the father said, how did you do this? And the son said, it's all your mercy. And by saying all his mercy, it meant, I'm taking from your merciful bank account and putting it on so you'll think I'm a big shot, you know. So Prabhupada always felt that funds were, you know, he saw it as Lakshmi. It wasn't meant to be given to carnivores to do the work that devotees are supposed to be doing. He would be like the Shringadev, and whoever was spending that money, he would bifurcate them. You asked the question of Prabhupada seeing the commonality of things. Well, especially he tried with religious leaders. In France, he was meeting with Cardinal Danielou, and I think he met with a couple other famous, I think one of the commentators on National Geographic who does the Attenborough, I think he met. They were basically the same age. He would try to find commonality, but his point was always with these people, do we believe in you shouldn't kill? And oh yeah, and then he would jump right into it. Well, then why do you kill? And they would become confused, and they say, well, we don't. But then he would show them how they do, trying to bring them to a unified position, but that wasn't very successful. He tried more with his own devotees to make sure it was common, and that he did through his books and through his projects. He wanted everybody to see that they're doing it for him, but he's doing it for us, so see that and respect that and protect that. So recently, another court fiasco where the original temple, the original place where Prabhupada began in New York, had somehow slipped through the cracks, and between the GBC and the person in charge, it became like, no, this is our temple. The money we get, and we're going to sell it, and we're going to do this and that. It's like the commonality was Prabhupada. So if you think that Prabhupada is still observing you on some level, then how would you go in this direction, you know? That's why he wanted his will, another way to make commonality. Okay, this is my will, 3 people in charge of every temple. The temples aren't meant to be sold, you know, the temple can be moved, but better not to. So even in the oneness that you have the common guru and you have Krishna and you have all that, the idea to be independent of everything is part of our original cause of separation from Krishna in the first place. I want to be separate. Okay, so that's a hard momentum to overcome, no matter what kind of clothes you wear or what your philosophy is, it will show up. Prabhupada had a deep regret and disappointment that his godbrothers didn't really understand Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's vision and mood to get together, form a GBC, and go out and travel and spread it and help him. So he tried to work with them within India. But he was very affected by the fact that immediately after Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's disappearance, that they all went their own way, claimed their turf, and started having legal battles. Especially, I believe it was Bon Maharaj, who was training his son up to be a lawyer, always with this in mind, to gain control of land and property. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he said, knew this, but he was trying to make it, hopefully, that they wouldn't do that. So that was Prabhupada's first disappointment. Then he started working in India and trying to get them to help him in India, and that didn't work out very well. And so he decided at some point, this is over, and I'm getting out of here. So he said, one of my godbrothers went to London and he failed, so maybe I'll go to America and maybe fail someplace new. He's a little humorous about it. So he didn't trust them because Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had made it very clear what he wanted, and he didn't see them doing that. So he didn't trust that they would come with him and do the same thing in his movement. So when he started getting wind of it, because Achyutananda went to India to buy land in Mayapur, and he wrote back to certain devotees, well, here, they're a little upset that Prabhupada is being called Prabhupada. And so letters started going back and forth, and that's when Prabhupada started feeling there's some energy in the movement to diminish him. So, you know, he had an attitude about his god brothers that they're good at breaking things, they're not good at creating things, you know. So that was his experience. He was hurt by that, and then when he asked them to come and join him, nobody came. And he wanted association too. All he had was us, who didn't know anything. So, but he liked our association because he saw that we were trying, and, you know, gradually we were doing books and making temples, and then he took us, you know, in his association. But you have to remember, he had god brothers too, and he wanted that, but didn't seem they ever rose really to the challenge. So, but he told us, like one time we were outside his door and he was having a shouting match with one of his god brothers. I can't remember who it was, but they were either talking about Prabhupada's way of doing things, whether it was engaging women in deity worship, or using the Prabhupada name, but they were yelling. And then he came out and he said, I can do this, but you can't ever criticize my god brothers. Well, you ask about Prabhupada's comment on GBC meetings and how we brought resolutions. In the beginning, it was very simple. We'd meet, we'd make resolutions, we'd take them to Prabhupada, he'd reject about 50% of them, make us redo it. But he didn't want this to be like long, drawn-out corporate meetings. The reason that it gets long and drawn out, the reason that he didn't want many GBCs is because he wanted unanimity on issues, and then he would put the dot on the I. So sometimes he would criticize, why are you meeting forever? You just make it simple, get to the point. It's not that complicated. It becomes complicated with power issues. Power issues have to do with manpower, money, and land. So when people's security and position become affected by resolutions, it becomes like, you know, any government or any, it starts, and so that happened even within Prabhupada's presence, what to speak of how hard it is when he's gone. So he just didn't want it to be overly organized with a lot of codes, and you have to make a list of all the rules and regulations and things like that. He really wanted it simple. Now they have like 50 GBC, which I don't think Prabhupada ever envisioned. He really wanted it small and to be able to reach common conclusions easily, which is really impossible when your group is too big. It just is. Before we got New Mayapur, he had agreed that if I stayed in India, he would give the loan. So he had Rameshwar send the money. So we were all excited. We were traveling at night. Archanananda was the driver, and we were excited that we were getting our first palace. It was really a palace. It was magnificent. And then on the way, it started torrential rain. And I'm sitting in the back holding on to the money because the owner wanted cash. We had to cash the check at the bank and bring him cash. So I'm holding on with dear life to the money. And Archananda's driving, and it's raining, and I fall asleep. And Archananda swerves and goes off the road with all the money for the building. And the car rolls and rolls and rolls. And then I wake up and I said, "Where are we? Are we there yet?" So somehow or other we got out of the ditch, we got the building, we started fixing it up, and then the devotees just worked day and night and day and night. And then the next time I saw Prabhupada before he came he was in London. And then we heard that he wasn't feeling well, so he was going to skip coming to New Mayapur. So that stressed out everybody. So I said, okay, let me go see what I can do. I'll go see Prabhupada and see what happens. So I got there, and he was in his room. He was happy to see me, and he said he wasn't feeling well. And I said, well, Prabhupada, it's really warm there now. You won't have any problem with the cold. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, we have all the printing there. Oh, yeah. And we're growing our crops. Yeah. And I said, and I have an elevator right to your room, so you wouldn't have to walk. He said, that's very nice. He said, see, Bhagavan is the supreme controller. He said, I'll go. So that was historic. He came. And then when he was lecturing, he said, if I had not come here, I would have missed a great thing. So that made all the devotees really happy. After that, it moves towards more of the final chapters. And he went to Rishikesh, and then he got more sick there, and then he went to Vrindavan. He went to Bombay to see how that was, and then he came back to Vrindavan. And it all shows a very important point. Prabhupada wanted to see Bombay established and the deities installed, and he got to see Vrindavan happen, deities installed after many disappointments. And we got to see how Prabhupada handled frustration and disappointment. But then we also got to see that no matter how hard we try in life, we may not complete our task. And so his main task was to finish the 10th canto. And he worked his whole life to that end. And perhaps he would have done it if he hadn't given us other books, but he felt those books were also important, and that's why he did the Krishna book, in case he didn't live long enough to finish that. So, in the end, he tried his utmost. He showed us that whatever your task is, you give it until your last breath, not just figuratively, but in reality, he was on his bed and in his last breath finishing 9th canto, or beginning 10th canto. But he didn't get to complete that. And he didn't get to see the opening of Bombay that he fought so hard for. So it was like he got to see his rooms a little bit, and he didn't get to experience the great fight that he went through to get the property and to fulfill his vision. So that was a valuable lesson for devotees to know that, you can't judge your success by always if you complete the task, but how you've tried with the right intent to do it. So then I saw Prabhupada in London, and he was really not looking like Prabhupada, but he was Prabhupada. But, he was very thin, not like we usually got to see him. And wearing sunglasses because the light hurt his eyes. And we were just like, we got beyond that. And then he was feeling ill again. He saw a doctor there, and his body was beginning to really fall apart in one sense. So we went back to India, and then we met him there, and nobody really thought that he was going to go. I was with Guru Kripa up in the guest house, and we would be talking, and this is some pastime that we can't understand, and obviously nobody's ready for Prabhupada to leave. It's just, this isn't really happening. His disappearance is not really happening. Nobody was really thinking that, well, after Prabhupada I'll be Guru. No, I can't say nobody, but most of us, Prabhupada was only here 11 years. So nobody thought that they were going to step into that position. But then as he became more and more, the finality of things started coming, we went in to see him to ask that famous conversation, which they're dissecting every period in comma now to figure out what he really said, and that caused a main division in the society which was pretty unnecessary, because his point was that while he's alive, the Ritviks, like we were doing the whole time anyway, we would always give initiation on Prabhupada's behalf. Years before Prabhupada's departure, we were chanting on beads and giving them to them. In the beginning, he chanted them and mailed them. Then he said, you chant on them and give them. And then you give the Gayatri mantra. So we were already doing that. That was not new. But when it came to the finality of like what happens when you're really not here, it got confused with, we're just supposed to remain Ritvik gurus. And in spite of the fact that in that conversation he says, you just become, his words were regular guru. You just become a guru, and they're your disciples, and they're my grand disciples. Well, that was simple enough. And the idea was you have to rise to the occasion. You may not be qualified now, but when the father passes away, the older siblings have to take care of the other younger siblings, and you have to move into this position. Now, maybe we got caught in the fanfare and the orchestration of the ritualistic part prematurely. We didn't know. This was a shock to the system. And simultaneously, within a year or so, several of the original people that he named, the 11 people, went and did some pretty wild things, which convinced people that this couldn't be what he meant. What he really meant was that you initiate on my behalf. But that wasn't really what he meant. What he wanted was take your time and qualify yourself for the position. And, you know, so if there's some fault, it's that we ran before we could walk, but not that we misunderstood what he said. And so that combination of, what do they call it, a perfect storm, where, you know, two things meet and collide and you can't climb the wave, but for the most part, to the credit of most, they carried on, or we carried on, his vision pretty much like he saw it and he wanted it and inspired to do that. But before that, I mean, amongst people that I knew, I was close, we didn't think this was going to happen. We thought Prabhupada was going to get through this, and he was going to last another 10 or 20 years until we were only 30 years old. Prabhupada landed when he was 69. I'm 73. And when I look back and envision my being 69 and Prabhupada being 69 and what he accomplished in that time, you know, for me, that's the definition of Shaktavash avatar. And that's why nobody really thought that we were his equals. You know, I mean, we could do things. I mean, I got a lot of nice buildings and temples, and we made devotees, but nobody could do what he did in the health condition that he was in and start from scratch in a foreign country where, you know, his English was good, but like go into the Bowery, the worst part of New York, when the winter, when it was cold, with bums, with people stealing his things, and from there create an international movement that, you know, what is it, 50 some years now later, is still going. So we got a chance to see an otherworldly person, someone not from this world, that was empowered to do something here. And that was, you know, that's something that every devotee who was there during Prabhupada's lifetime got to see and experience. I don't know how it is today, how people understand who Prabhupada was as generation goes after generation. Sometimes it gets a little more dim. The books are there, of course, and unlike Jesus, you have videos and you have movies and you can see everything, but to be there with him in the struggles and in the challenges was a whole nother world. To see how he dealt with success, how he dealt with challenges and misfortune and the pain that you go through on behalf of Krishna was just, you know, part of that first generation's enlightenment. There's nothing, I don't know how else you can describe that, you know. When Prabhupada would see someone leave, how he would feel. When he wanted the temple in Bombay and they were trying to cheat us and, you know, attack the deities and break the temple down. When the devotees in Mayapur got attacked by the Muslims there and they broke the hands of the devotees and they practically raped one of our ladies, and Bhavananda had to take a shotgun out and shoot. They got marched to jail. And Prabhupada's on his last breath having to deal with all this and showing us no matter what situation, Krishna's going to test you. You don't get to be 100% peaceful here. That's not the game that you signed up for. At the time I could define it, he was always selfless. He never did anything for his own aggrandizement. He was always wanting to give. And when it appeared that he was receiving something, it was more to teach us the principles of humility, how to inquire, how to keep our egos down. But he was full. He was overflowing with knowledge and vision, and although you lived a lot for his smile and his approval, there was as much. You knew when he was chastising you that it wasn't to hurt you. It wasn't to penetrate your faith and your... I mean, he was pretty strong. And a lot of times it pretty much broke people because, it was like you felt the full weight that what you did affects not just you or not just him, but what you do can have ramifications for everything. So we all know that, We all learn that lesson one way or another. But he was just full. That's how I saw him. He was always ripe. At every moment you could touch him and Krishna would come out. Full like that.
Jayani